and you can get started. And do you want me to go ahead? You want to introduce yourself before I flip the next slide, or is your introduction on the next slide?
It's on, yeah, it's on. I think it's on here. If not, I'll do that.
Okay, there we go.
Go ahead. You can go one more. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for, sticking with it on this really miserable October day. My name is Annie Fenton. I'm the program director for the Michigan International Talent Solutions Program in the Office of Global Michigan. Actually, if you go back just one slide, I will prep our session material here.
Yeah, and can I just say really quick, if everyone can please put their chats in the Zoom chat that's in the middle. If you came in through Whova, because I'm the host and the moderator, I can't see the Whova Q&A in chat. So if you can please put any questions in the Zoom chat that's in the middle of your screen if you came in through Whova. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, and feel free, this is really informal. I just want to say, feel free to pipe up. You can unmute yourselves if you have a question. You can throw it in the chat. Tammy's going to watch the chat for us. And I really just want to have a conversation with you all and support you in what a lot of you are already doing, which is being a resource for your ESL students who are also job seekers. So again, my name is Annie Fenton. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about resources for ESL transitions. And in that capacity, I'm talking about those individuals in some of your classes and programs who are coming with international skills and qualifications, but don't really know how to use them and are oftentimes looking to you all as a trusted resource to help them. So I want to give you all some information today so you can feel more confident and more empowered when you have those conversations with your students. Next slide. Like I said, we are the Office of Global Michigan. Some of you may remember us as the Michigan Office for New Americans. So we've been through a little bit of transition in the last few years. We were created in 2014 by then Governor Snyder, and we were housed in the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs for quite a few years under that name, Michigan Office for New Americans, or MONA, as we were known by for short. Our mission is still the same. We really are working on supporting our economy by retaining and attracting global talent. We are running to promote the skills and energy of our entrepreneurs here in Michigan and really just generally make Michigan a more welcoming place for immigrants and refugees. So we are still the same entity. We're still most of the same staff. We do have this new name, Office of Global Michigan, or Global Michigan for short, and we're now housed in Leo. We joined Leo when they formed in 2019. So a couple differences, but mostly the same. Next slide. And just one piece of housekeeping for me, I tend to speak very quickly. So if I'm speaking too fast for anybody, please raise your hand or pipe up and say, hey, slow down, because there's a lot of material and I want to get through all of it and still have time for questions, but let me know if I'm speaking too quickly. Like I said, my program is called the MITS program. We are one of two main service programs within the Office of Global Michigan. We launched back in 2015 as a professional job search training program for skilled immigrants, which essentially meant that we were working directly with individuals who are living here in Michigan, who had international experience, who had international qualifications, didn't know really how to get a job here in Michigan in their field, and the program was designed to support them with that. We made a big pivot to our program last year and decided, for lots of reasons, that we really wanted to focus on being a technical assistance provider to our partners in state government. So we've been working on that. We stopped that direct service model, working directly with immigrant job seekers, and we've been operating as a technical assistance provider and trainer and capacity builder within state government, trying to support our partners that are front-facing with immigrants and refugees across all the departments. So that includes like Unemployment Insurance Agency and DHHS, Michigan Works through our department Leo, all those folks who are reaching out to the population and maybe could do a better job of supporting them within their own program. So that's a little bit of a change if some of you are familiar with the MITS program in its previous iteration. Next slide. So in the short time we have together today, I've got a couple key objectives for us. No one is going to expect you to be an expert in this information, but I do think it's going to be helpful for you all as you think about individuals who've come to you in the past looking for information. I think the two biggest or most frequent requests I get are to learn more about credential evaluation for this population. How do I support this individual who's originally from Iraq, who has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering? How do I help them get their degree evaluated? Or how do I support them, going on to additional training or education? So that's something we get a lot, and I hope to really spell out that process for you all today so you can feel a little bit more confident next time around you have that question from one of your students. And then we're going to talk a little bit about generally how to best support this population with their job search process. And again, I'm not doing this because I think any of you need this extra responsibility in your roles, but I do know that a lot of you are by default answering some of these questions maybe more frequently than you would like to. And I want to just give you the information and at a minimum point you to some resources where you can send folks there for additional support and guidance. But yeah, so we're going to talk through some of these concepts: credential evaluation, understanding career pathways, which is really best practice for everybody, but especially the immigrant refugee job seeker community for reasons we'll talk about in just a minute. And then also talking about the importance of upskilling and reskilling for this population. And we'll spend a little bit of time, if we have it at the end, talking about professional licensing. Next slide. Actually, before I move on, is there anything that I didn't cover that you all really want me to talk about today? This is where that informal piece comes in. Just feel free to pipe up if there's something you're disappointed because it wasn't on that list.
If you think of something throughout the presentation, just put it in the chat, but use the Zoom chat, please. I can't see the Whova chat because I'm hosting. Thank you.
I want to just kind of get this out of the way right at the start of our conversation. There's a whole other training, and maybe we'll do this for the spring, Tammy, about immigration statuses and program eligibility, because that's the second one I get all the time. But I just wanted to preface the conversation we're going to have today with a little primer so you all can understand, you know, if people are asking you for support, getting a job here, do you know, can they work? Do they have work authorization? What are some additional barriers they might have to address before you all put your time and energy into that process? So I wanted to cover a couple of different things. And yeah, I see your note, Patricia, I will. So there are two general types of visas. There are immigrant visas and there are non-immigrant visas. Immigrant visas, if you want to think about them as more permanent opportunities. So they may not start as permanent, but an individual usually comes here if they have access to one of these immigrant pathways and will be on a path to citizenship. So when we say immigrant visas, they usually arrive in the US with a green card and their status is legal permanent resident. And with that, they get most, they're eligible for most opportunities. So that would include, you know, going back to school if they qualify for student aid. It would include workforce development programs. It obviously includes their work authorization. So when you think about this population of immigrant visas, you can think, yes, they're fine. They are eligible to work. They're eligible for all your WIOA programs. They're eligible to go back to school if that's something that fits within their own career pathway. And when we think about, when we break out the different types of immigrant visas, there are a few chunks here that I want to talk about briefly. So most of them, because of the way our immigration system is structured, fall into the family-based category. So that would be spouses of US citizens, that's immediate relative and families. Those are folks who are coming on immigrant visas. Then we also have humanitarian categories, which we also see a lot. And those are refugees, individuals who come as asylum seekers aren't immediately immigrant visas. They have to go through this asylum seeking process. And once that's approved, they're actually called asylees, and then they get the same benefits as refugees. We just have a process that is different. Refugees are processed outside the US and asylees are processed within the US. And SIVs, which you may have heard quite a lot in the news the last couple of months in relation to the Afghan arrivals, those are individuals who have supported the US military abroad and they qualify for what we call special immigrant visas. Similarly, they come in with a green card and they will be eligible for citizenship within 5 years. Then we have these are very niche-based employment visas. These are not the type that most of you are seeing. These are what we like to call investor visas. And because folks are spending boku bucks starting a business or investing in a business, they sweeten the deal with a green card. So EB1 through EB5, I don't know that you all will ever see those, but those are one type of immigrant visa that are employment-based. The others are non-immigrant visa. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the other one is a diversity lottery visa. So this stems from many, many decades of individuals coming from countries that are underrepresented in immigration to the US. And so every year, the United States hosts a diversity lottery, which is literally that. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people apply to this. 50,000 people are selected every year. They are awarded a green card and can come with their immediate family to the US. And they also will transition after, I think it's 3 years or 5 years to citizenship. So those are the majority of immigrant visas, and all of those folks you can be confident are eligible to work here without sponsorship. They're also eligible for all federal programs and education opportunities. Next slide. Then we have our non-immigrant visas, which I think may be a little bit more familiar to you all, and this is more the population that we tend to see in adult ESL. And then you start to see some folks who are here on, well, you probably won't, business visa or tourist visa. Those are the short-term 90-day visas. I hope no one's trying to access your program with those visas. But you see the students, international students, F1, well, their spouses are called F2s. They do not have work authorization, and they won't unless they adjust their status to another category. We have exchange as well, which we see a lot of times with like college level students and volunteers and those kind of folks. But mostly what I think you all see quite frequently are employment-based spousal visas. So the employment base that you see here, H-1B, H-2A, which are temporary or seasonal, and then L visas and E visas. So a lot of you are seeing the spouses of those folks, some of the individuals themselves as well, but I think a lot of what we call trailing spouses come on the H4 is the category for the spouse of the H-1B, and then L2 would be the spouse of the L visa. And those are what we call intercompany transfer visas. So if a company is headquartered outside the US, but has operations in the US, they can get a visa for one of their international employees to come here and work in their US premises. And that's what we call an L visa. And we see a lot of those, especially in Southeast Michigan, with our automotive supplier companies. Okay, I just want to go over that. I know it's a lot of information. And again, we can have a really in-depth conversation about immigration and statuses maybe in the spring. But I wanted to tee up some of the conversation today so you feel a little bit comfortable knowing what individuals might qualify for and what that means based on their status. Okay, next slide. Actually, before we move on, I want to ask Patricia, did that explain a little bit more about the employment-based visa, or is there a specific question?
No, I wanted you to go through what was it, EB1? I'm not sure what the 1 through 5 means.
Oh, well, that was on the immigrant visa. And like I said, I don't think that you'll see any of those folks.
Okay.
In adult ESL. Most of those are yeah, they're a different population, and there aren't that many here in Michigan. So there's EB1, EB2, EB3, EB4, EB5, and they all have different criteria for the USCIS. And so it usually refers to the amount of their investment, the type of business, how many employees they're going to hire, et cetera. But each one of those visas comes with a green card for that person and their family, their dependent family members. So okay. I put it on there just so that people understand that's one type of immigrant visa. But the employment-based visa that we see more often, I think, in the adult ed space is the non-immigrant or the short-term visa, where somebody is the spouse or a dependent of somebody who's on a work visa.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to transition to talking a little bit about career pathways. Does everybody know this term, or at least comfortable with this term? I think it's A to Z graphic. There should be a little asterisk on that slide, and I will share these slides with everybody. Jackie, yeah, so there should be a source on there, and if not, I'll find it for you. So career pathways. Anybody want to take a stab at a very, very general definition of career pathways? Nobody?
There are 16 career pathways, if I'm not mistaken. And within each pathway, there are, it's like a general category overall. Mm-hmm. And within each of those pathways, there are certain jobs. For instance, IT, you would have different categories of IT, or medical research. I guess you'd have different categories of different departments of medicine, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I think that's a very specific usage of career pathways. There's also a very general definition, which Anne is kind of getting to, which is basically any way a person needs to use their skills and experience and additional supports to get a job. So that's really what we're talking about with career pathways. And if you can go to the next slide, Tammy, I will explain a little bit more about this concept. So this is the WIOA definition of career pathways. And it really kind of talks about all the different sectors that are involved in supporting job seekers with their career pathway alignment. And I highlighted C because a lot of us are kind of in that space where you may be counseling formally or informally, an individual who is, trying to get employment through education and career opportunities. And so there's lots of different and additional ways to talk about career pathways, but when I'm talking about it, I'm kind of talking about this piece. So for nonprofits, I know you all are in a slightly different situation, but when I talk to, refugee resettlement agencies and organizations who are delivering employment services to immigrants and refugees, they all fall into this coaching space. And that's how they interact with individuals on a career pathways model. Next slide. Do we miss one? I think go back, yeah. So like I said, career pathways is not anything that is specific to immigrants and refugees at all. This is the way the feds are moving. This is probably a lot of direction you're getting. Those of you who are Title II providers are getting from the state. Everybody wants people to use career pathways for a couple of reasons. For the immigrant refugee job seeker population, it's extremely helpful because it identifies that one-on-one individualized support that they need to get them to their ultimate career outcomes. One of the things, if you take away nothing from our conversation today, I really want you all to know that this customized, individualized career development support is really key for immigrant and refugees because they have a few additional barriers that we have to work through. And this model really allows us to address that. It allows us to approach career development from an asset-based model. So what are they coming with? These folks are not clean slates. They're not blank slates. They have, they have educational qualifications. They have work experience. They have, professional opportunities and portfolios at play. And it's our job, if we're working in the space, to support them with employment outcomes to really understand what are they bringing to the table here in the U.S. for a U.S. employer. And that means really focusing on their background. So when somebody comes to you, and you understand, what's your degree in, what company did you work for? What was your position? What were your main objectives and responsibilities in those roles? That's the basis of how we as coaches would support them in getting employment. We don't want to treat them as a blank slate. They have skills they're coming with, and it's our job as coaches and individuals who are supporting them to really understand that and kind of be the liaison and the connector between where they came from with this stuff and where they want to go, and really contextualizing that into a US context. So that's why it's really important to focus on the individualized career counseling piece within career pathways. And it's really important for immigrant and refugee job seekers that we do that, right? We'll talk a little bit later, but I just want to say the reasoning behind that is because in the US, employers are still very focused on work experience. So we can take somebody who's here, maybe they're several years out of their career, and say to them, and then sometimes they say to us, I don't care about that, I'll do anything. Now I want to be an IT professional. I was an accountant, now I want to be an IT. And I think a lot of us have really good intentions about supporting people when they come to us and say, this is what I want to do. But we also need to be very clear and manage their expectations about how an employer would react to that. If they go through a lot of time and energy to reskill in a new profession, but they don't have any work experience and they don't have a track record with any employers, either international or US based, they're not going to be that attractive to an employer anyways, regardless of how new and in demand their skill set is. So we want to level set their expectations and really focus on, what they have done in the past, how they can build their skills to be more competitive in the job search, and then put them out into an opportunity to get employment with those companies here in Michigan. So that's a really important piece, and that's why career pathways is ideal for this population, because again, it treats them with the respect they deserve in terms of already having a very specific career portfolio and an opportunity to build on that so they can be successful getting back into their profession here. It's also really good to identify what I call on-ramps. So knowing where somebody comes from allows us to know where they should be going next. Where does it make sense to plug them in the US context? So really identifying what is their most recent professional job title, and then figuring out where are the transferable skills. And sometimes it's not apples to apples and those titles don't match up. But if you go through what their responsibilities and duties were in the previous job and what their skills are, you can match that up really evenly to job titles here. And then that allows them to focus and be successful, because when they're applying for those positions, they become really well-qualified candidates because they're meeting 70, 80, 90% of those job qualifications. So we need to find the opportunity to match them up using their previous job experience and get them get them into their career. It may not be exactly where they were before. It may not be where they want to be right now, but if we get them into their own profession, then that's an on-ramp to where they want to be in, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And then also it allows us, because we are really talking about an individualized model for support, we're going to focus on what their individual needs are. We talked about what their assets are, but what are their opportunities for growth? And a lot of times that comes in their ESL proficiency. So if they do need to do very specific detailed work on that, we can identify opportunities for them to do that and get more support. One of the things that is really important for people is that they may spend a whole lot of time in ESL classes, which really helps them overall, but then they may get into an interview process and struggle because they don't have that technical vocabulary. So we can also be thinking about identifying resources for them where they can support some of those more niche ESL opportunities, as well as their overall proficiency. And then additionally, supporting with their job search skills. So we're going to be able to identify where people, if you're thinking about them as an individual and what specifically they need to do to get a job, it's also very easy to identify where the gaps are in their job search skill set. So they may be quite shy, they may not be networking at all, they may struggle with the written application materials or interviewing. And so it's easy to pinpoint what's necessary to support them and identify an organization that can help them. Those are all really important reasons why career pathways is so helpful when we think about job search support for skilled immigrants. Okay, next slide. I included this mostly for the visual. I think a lot of us have spent a lot of time with the concept of a career ladder and what that means for forward progression and growth in their career. But I'm really excited to see that that concept doesn't make sense to a lot of people anymore, not just immigrants and refugees, all over the board. Women who take career gaps to raise children, or people who leave the workforce of their own will, or if they got laid off, if they were the result of a dying industry or an economic downturn. Careers are not always upwards and onwards, and we need to be realistic about that. There are times where people need to stop and start over and move to the side and cross train and then come back to another field. So I think the concept of career latticing is really helpful for everybody when we are managing expectations, but it also allows immigrants and refugees to see their experience replicated in a model like this, because they can see times where they've had to stop and start over, take breaks, focus on their ESL, do some training and certification, then get employment, then switch employment. And it makes them realize that it's not always you start in one position and you just move up. So I really like this visual, and I think it's really helpful when you're interacting with individuals to explain to them that it's not always going to be, you don't have to start in the job you're going to end up in. There's lots of on-ramps and off-ramps along the way, and they can make of it what they need to. Okay, next. So this is, when I think about career pathways, I'm dealing with individuals, I really think about it as a formula. What is their education? What is their experience, their work experience or paid experience? What are their additional qualifications? And the mixture of those three things tells me what their likelihood is for being placed with a US employer in their field. And any deficiencies that I see among those things are the first things that I identify for them to work on to be more employable in their field. So if you want to think about career pathways as a formula, this is how I do it. And it allows me to see each job seeker as an individual and identify where there are opportunities for growth and development for them in support of their ultimate goal, which is professional job placement. Okay, next. Okay, we're switching to credential evaluation. I thank you all for sticking with me for the career pathway stuff. Now is the real meat of the conversation. So you can move forward, Tammy, one more slide. So credential evaluation, also known as degree evaluation. There's a couple of things here that I put just to guide our initial conversation, but we can also talk a little bit more about all these things if you want to stop me and ask more information. So first of all, when is a degree evaluation necessary? Because it's not always necessary. But I said there are three main categories where I would encourage somebody to make the investment in a degree evaluation. The first is for employment. So if they are actively trying to get a job and they completed their degree outside the US at a college that is not well known, like they didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge or something that a US employer would immediately gravitate to and understand, then it's really important for them to get a degree evaluation. What a degree evaluation does is essentially, it's a comparison report of their degree at the university they went to outside the US versus the same type of degree they would have completed in the US. And they can go course by course or diploma by diploma, and I'll talk about those in a second, to identify how much detail they want to give to the recipient about how similar they are. But essentially what they come out with is an evaluation report that says this individual's bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Baghdad University is the same as a bachelor's degree of mechanical engineering in the US. And they can then take that report information, put it on their resume. And when an employer is reading that resume and they see the information underneath their university, they can say, oh, okay, so I might not know this specific university. I might not know their level of, education, attainment and reputation in the region, but I do trust WES, or I do trust ECE as a US-based entity to tell me what's the caliber of this person's qualification. And so that can really help an employer. It's kind of a third-party vetting process where the employer doesn't have to be an expert in all these different countries and how their degrees are structured, but they can trust a third-party provider to say this is the equivalent and they have the skills that they need for this position. So that's really helpful for people who are seeking employment for the first time. They don't have a US company on their resume. They don't have much of a track record. A degree evaluation can help them get their foot in the door with an employer who otherwise may be a little hesitant to consider their international qualifications. The second reason that individuals would need to get a degree evaluation is if they decide they want to go back to school. So if they want to go do a master's degree or higher, or they want to participate in a couple different trainings that require proof of their background and experience. One, for example, would be like a PMP. So for a project manager, they have to prove they already have a bachelor's and so much work experience in that field. That's another reason to get a degree evaluation. And most of the community colleges, as well as the four-year universities, will accept degree evaluations for people who completed their initial bachelor's degree outside the US, and then they can use that to admit them for a master's program or higher. That's one thing that they definitely would need a degree evaluation for. And then the third thing is licensing. So if they need to get licensed in their field or very specific certification, then they usually need a degree evaluation as well, because that's going to prove to the licensing body that they have the caliber of education required to be licensed here in Michigan. So those are the three reasons why people would need to get a degree evaluation and what situations it would be helpful for them. There are also different types of evaluation too. One I kind of alluded to is the document by document. So that is really just degree to degree. And it goes over, do you meet the threshold of 120 credits to be considered a bachelor's degree? Does your university in Baghdad or wherever generally, include all these components as part of your training that would also happen in the US degree of the same nature? And then, what was your GPA and how good of a student were you during that course? So that is really the meat of what we call a document by document, or D by D. And that's something, if an individual needs to get a diploma evaluation or a degree evaluation just for the purposes of employment, it's fine for them to get that D by D. That is enough. That's like scores on the doors. That's all that an employer would need. And it's a little bit easier for them to get because they can often use copies of their diploma or their transcript to get it. So it's a slightly lesser burden of proof on documentation. The other type of evaluation is a course by course, or C by C. And that can be a little bit harder for folks to get because it usually requires their higher ed institution from outside the US send a certified sealed copy of their transcript and diploma to the credential evaluator. And so you can see that individuals who may be refugees or asylum seekers, or their country is currently at war, or there's a problem accessing their home country, it can be really hard for them to meet the criteria for documentation for a C/C. And so that can be challenging for people who need a C/C because that's what's required for licensing and that's what's required for admission to these higher ed bodies. So that can be very, very difficult. And so this is why it's important to ask somebody, what do you need it for? And then you can identify, you or me or whoever's supporting them can identify what type of diploma or degree evaluation they need, and is it feasible or not, and what are the other options that might be available to them. I see that, oh, how do you get a degree verification? Yeah, so it is kind of on the next slide, but I also want to say this is something that the individual would do for themselves. There are two main entities, and I'm just kind of going into the next topic here, but not the next slide. So the next one is which credential evaluator is best in each situation. And there are two main entities that are what are kind of universal credential evaluators that you might know. WES is World Education Services, and ECE is Education Credentialing Evaluators. They're national, they're kind of the gold standard for degree evaluation. And I would feel comfortable sending anybody to either of those providers. WES generally has a slightly higher requirement for documentation than ECE does. So it kind of depends on what people can provide as to whether they might want to go with ECE or WES, and more universities generally accept WES than ECE. So I think the main point again is to ask these questions to individuals and say, what do you need it for? And then that would identify which entity you would send them to. Because if the question is that they need it for getting into school, then my response would be, well, double check with the college you're applying for, make sure they don't have a preferred vendor for degree evaluation, because what we don't want to do is have them go ahead and get their degree evaluated and then find out after the fact that that wasn't the right credentialing evaluator provider. Same thing for licensing, professional licensing. A lot of the industry associations that do the preliminary certification for state licensing have their own proprietary credential evaluators. So that's something just to think about. And this is something our office can always help you with if it comes down to this and there's really not an understanding of what's best. Give me a call. I can walk them through that in just a couple minutes and get them to the right provider, and they can feel confident they're not going to have to pay a second time for this. The good news is once they get to that point and they know what they need and where they need it from, they get this access to these evaluations for life. So it's all online now, and they don't have to worry about losing it, getting paper copies. They have electronic profiles that stick with them forever. And if 3 years down the road, they say, okay, now actually I want to go back to school, or now I'm ready to start my licensing application, they log into their accounts, they send a nominal fee for the provider to send out a copy of their evaluation to whoever needs it, and it's there for them. So it's a great opportunity, and it's really something that helps in all three of those situations. I want to stop because I see we've got some comments coming in. I hope that answers your question, Yaneth. If not, I can talk a little bit more about the mechanics, but mostly if they go, they need to kind of pick which provider is right. They go on their website, they follow the instructions about what documentation is needed, and there's a drop down for country. So they pick their country and their specific information about what entity they're supposed to connect with. There's a template for them to print off and fill out. Translation can be an issue. So some countries will provide it to them in English if they ask for it. Other times it'll be sent in whatever the official language is for the country. And then it would be up to that individual to get it translated here. And that can be done through a normal translation company if they want that extra kind of confidence that it's done properly and it'll be accepted and it's all official. Translations can also be done by anybody who is both a native English speaker and a fluent speaker of the language of the document. So that's kind of important thing. They have to be a native English speaker and attest to that, but also be proficient in the language of the document. So if there's somebody that they know here within the community or a first generation person who is a native English speaker but also knows their language, they can save a little bit of money on that. So Michigan Works, maybe some do. As a policy, Michigan Works is not right now paying for degree evaluations, and I'm working with Erica on that, and I keep pestering her, and so hopefully we're going to get something done soon, because this really is foundational for all of the upskilling and reskilling that we all will pay for, and I think that there are other states that do pay for degree evaluations through EOA dollars. And I think that Michigan can and will get on board with that in a more universal way. So I don't know.
Annie, Michigan Works pays for it, but we can't pay for it with our Title II dollars. And Erica, we've been trying to convince her to open it up. I think maybe that's what you need.
Oh, okay.
Michigan Works is Title I. And so if they're a qualified Michigan Works participant in our IET program, they will pay to do this for some of the students, but we cannot pay for it with Title II funds or Section 107 funds right now.
I didn't realize Title I. Okay, good. As a couple of years ago, they said they wouldn't pay for it. So I'm glad that that's happening. And then we'll see, hopefully we can also get Title II on board too. That's good news, actually. That's great. Thank you. Stephanie shared an example. One of our students was a microbiologist in her country. The best that Michigan Works can offer her is training to be a farm tech. Right. Okay. So this is, maybe we need 2 sessions of the spring conference about, and this goes back to the career pathways piece, right? And I think our Michigan Works partners are trying really hard to do well by everybody, but they are not well, they're not well positioned to support anybody who's coming from a high skill background, you, me, anybody, and let alone individuals from outside the country. And so I think that there are definitely things we can do to support them in understanding that. And there are entities here that can, I think, work with these individuals and give them an understanding of where they should go. And then they can take that information back to Michigan Works and say, here's the training that I think is going to be most helpful for me. And oftentimes their WEO case manager is willing to hear that, but that's just not something that the training really incorporates for them. And that's not their main clientele, to be quite honest. Somebody who's got a master's or a PhD in microbiology is not somebody that they are trained to work with on a day-to-day basis. So it's a struggle for everybody involved, and we got to figure out a system to support everybody. But I will say that I'm more than happy to set up a consultation with her, Stephanie, or him. And I'm sorry, I don't know who it was, but and because that was something that our MIDS program was designed to do, we no longer have that, but I've still tried to make myself available for these kind of one-off consultations just to get people going down the right pathway and identifying what is best for them in terms of how to, either get into their field or identify an alternative career pathway. And if they need some upskilling along that route so that they can get a position that is much closer to what they were doing before they came to Michigan. So if you and I want to connect offline, I'm more than happy to offer that. And the farm tech piece, I have a lot to say about farm tech in that well, anyways, but that's something that was created to try to provide a credential or like a mid-level position where none really existed before, and it's not required. And there's a lot of companies that are charging the state for these farm tech training roles, which they don't necessarily need to have. So there are a lot of pharmacies that prefer to train them themselves, document their hours, let them take the test. So I'll just say that definitely is not a route we would put this person on, and I'd be happy to talk to her about other options. Okay, Tammy, yeah, okay. Did I catch up here? I'm just reading Anne's last comment. Oh yeah, do you
want me to switch the slide while you read that?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, I was hoping to watch that session too. And that's really a lot of what we're talking about. And I hope that this kind of matches up to what their research was showing as well. And I think I just covered that bit about the Michigan Works not really being equipped for the job match for lots of different reasons. So yeah, we can touch base on that independently too. All right. So then going back to the slide deck, this is the WES Gateway evaluation, and this is something that is new within the last couple of years. WES has said, okay, we understand that there's a large number of people who can't go through our traditional degree evaluation for those reasons of documentation. And so they created this Gateway program, which is an alternative evaluation. Right now, it's limited to individuals from 7 countries that you can see in on the left-hand side. It's Afghanistan, it's Eritrea, it's Iraq, it's Syria, it's Turkey, it's Ukraine, and Venezuela. They have to be from one of those 7 countries for now. That might change in the future, but for now, that's what they're allowing in. It is also currently free. So individuals who can't get their documentation and therefore wouldn't qualify for a traditional degree evaluation can apply through our office, through Global Michigan. We're the affiliate for WES in Michigan, and I'll meet with them, I'll get their information, I will apply to the program for them. They can get this alternative evaluation, which can be used absolutely for employment, and then potentially for education. We know there are lots of community colleges that are coming on board with the alternative evaluation. Four-year universities might be a harder sell, and right now none of the licensing providers will accept them. But it's a start, and it's an opportunity to give people something when the alternative is nothing. Okay. Okay, next slide. Yeah, and I just want to say the whole point of the degree evaluation and why we go into so much detail about why they're important and how to access them and which ones to get is because we want to continue to, kind of shout this message that international degrees are both valid and they're valued. People don't have to come here. They don't have to start over. They just have to figure out how to translate their experience and their education to a format that the U.S. employer or U.S. institution can understand. So we want, again, going back to that career pathways model, we don't want to say someone's a clean slate. They're coming here, they have this degree. How can they get that information translated in a way that makes sense to the U.S. audience, and then build from there into their profession and to advance their career from that point? So we don't want people to feel deflated. I think a lot of times people do, and we hear a lot from individuals like, my degree, I went to college outside the US, so it doesn't mean anything and I can't get a job with it. And we want to try to push back on that as much as we can, because that's not really always true. Sometimes it is, but most times it's not. And they need to just go through this evaluation process and have that third-party vetting and see what happens from there. And sometimes, a lot of times, individuals have started a job search process without understanding all of the pieces of the job search process. So they're not, taking the time to customize their applications. They're not contextualizing their international experience. They're not, customizing their writing cover letters and explaining their story. And so when they go through this process over and over of just sending resumes out into the black hole, they assume that it's their degree that's the problem. And most of the times it's just because they don't understand or are operating to the expectations of the U.S. employers. And so we need to kind of level set their expectations and also make them understand that there are ways to utilize their international experience and build on it to be competitive in the job search. Next slide. Upskilling and reskilling. So this is the next piece of the puzzle, the next tool in our toolkit. You can go forward, Tammy. And what we're doing with upskilling and reskilling is revisiting that career pathways piece, that individualized career support, where we said we were going to identify the assets and then we were going to circle back to figure out what could be improved or were opportunities for development. And that's really where upskilling and reskilling come in. It's that opportunity to identify what specific pieces they might be missing to the employment equation, to that, remember the one that was like international or education plus experience plus qualifications. Where are there gaps in that formula that's going to affect their ability to get a job in their field? And this is where upskilling and reskilling come in. Upskilling and reskilling, I'm guilty of using these terms interchangeably, but they are very distinct terms, and I want to just explain why. Upskilling is really talking about identifying those missing pieces or qualifications. So an individual has a degree, they have a work experience background, but they may need to undertake short-term credentials to get back up to speed in their field, right? So if they are trying to find a job, but they consistently are having a hard time meeting the qualifications, it's usually because their software skills have lapsed, they aren't up to date in certain qualifications or certifications that they might need to take to be successful and to be eligible for those positions. And that's usually a very easy fix. They identify what are what I usually have folks do is undertake this process of collecting 10 to 12 job descriptions, highlight all the things that they don't currently have, and then compile that list and find out, take away the duplication. And then that list becomes their short list for upskilling. So you need Adobe, you need AutoCAD 3ds, you need whatever it is, accounting software or something like that. This is how we then focus their upskilling and identify how we can change them from meeting only 50% of the job description qualifications up to 70 and 80%. So that's upskilling, is really meeting that gap. What are they missing? Reskilling goes back to that population that for a couple of different reasons may not be able to work in their field. Sometimes there's an industry mismatch, like we would get a lot of times, in the old days, before the travel ban, we got so many more individuals from the Middle East, and we had a lot of people coming with gas and oil experience, and they'd arrive in Michigan, and we'd be like, this isn't really the, if you were in Texas or other places, that would make sense. But here's how we can think about either utilizing your stuff for utility companies or retraining you in a slightly different field. So sometimes it's because what they did before doesn't exist in the place they're living now, or the industry has moved on to a level where they're not competitive. But in any sense, what we want to do is make sure that there aren't just ways to upskill them before we think about totally reskilling them. So the reskilling piece kind of becomes the blank slate, but we want to make sure they understand that with that also comes challenges, because then they don't have the work experience that an employer is going to be looking for from them. And there's a traditional or an additional uphill battle for them to get employed, even if they do get these great certifications. What is best practice for immigrant job seekers is really this. And again, like I said, it is building on these principles of career pathways. As you can see, career pathways, the more we get through this conversation, is the foundation for all of these pieces that we're adding on top of it. When we talk about upskilling, we really want to focus on short-term credentials of value. And that credentials of values piece has a very specific definition, which I'll talk about in just a second. But what I want to talk about here is short-term. We don't want to put people into, community college non-credit pathways that drag on forever, that they can't put on their resume separate from like an associate's degree. We don't want that. We want short-term, we want stackable, we want transferable. That's where the benefit comes from in the upskilling piece, things that they can complete easily and move on to the next one and move on to the next one, and add all of those on their resume so that they can show that they've been building their skills. I put IET on here. I know you're all familiar with IET, but this is another best practice that we want to talk about. Is upskilling is great and ESL are great. It's even greater when we do them together, because then we can shorten the duration that people are out of employment. And so we really want to focus on this contextualized and integrated education and training piece. And then I already talked about when reskilling is necessary. So you can go forward, Tammy. Just touching on this credentials of value piece. If anyone's really interested in this, there's some tools coming out of the state through the LMI and Office of 60 by 30 and all those kind of things, which really focus on this credentials of value piece. This is from National Skills Coalition's report from last summer, which really tried to define what is a mid-level credential. And so what they came up with, which is what I also use, is, are they industry accredited? That's really important. So if we send somebody to do a course, is it industry accredited? So can the entity that they do the training with, will they send them a certificate that says this, individual completed Excel level 2, and that, does it say it comes from Microsoft, or does it come from a community college program? So community college program is fine. Microsoft is better because that's the industry accreditation. Same thing we said before, it needs to be short-term. We don't want folks who are already working or who are struggling with additional barriers to employment to get stuck in these educational opportunities that aren't resulting in immediate opportunities for career development. So short-term is really important. And again, we want to value their existing credentials. So there's no point if somebody already tells you they have a bachelor's degree from outside the US that's been evaluated. We don't want to demote that experience by putting them into an associate level qualification. And then we want to make sure, I think before, that they're transferable and stackable. So this is where the industry accreditation becomes really important. You can take them with any training provider, but the actual certification comes from the industry accredited provider, like so the Microsoft, the Cisco, the PMP, whoever it is. And then no matter where they do that Excel level 2, level 3, level 4, those all can show up on their resume as kind of consistent and stackable, and they can also move between companies. So if companies are doing their own training and they're not industry accredited, it doesn't necessarily mean much to the next company they go to. That would make it not transferable. We want it to be transferable. And then of course it needs to meet the labor market demand and really get them closer to being employed in their field. So that's really important too, that we make sure we're giving them the right information and not just, here's a and a list of 5 trainings you can do, pick one. Again, it goes back to the career pathways piece of what's specific to your situation, what is going to address your existing gaps and make you more employable in your field. Okay, next slide. Okay, very quickly, because I want to get to some questions. Professional licensing, you may have individuals that are in your classes that were teachers or engineers or social workers or whatever, and they're interested in professional licensing when they come here. You can go to the next slide, Tammy. And this process is kind of a exploratory process similar to the credential evaluation, really identifying, do they need to be licensed to get working in their field? Because some professions do require licensing for very minimum entry-level positions, and others don't. They can kind of operate under the radar and not be licensed. Engineering is a really good example. Engineers in Michigan don't really need to be licensed unless they are environmental engineers or civil engineers, individuals who are making decisions about public safety in terms of structural development and roads and those kind of things. Other folks can really get on the career ladder in really other ways, like project manager and project engineer and assistant engineer. All those kind of things are available to them before they ever have to get a professional engineering license. So I can identify from a conversation with that individual, what are your main goals? What's available to you? What's feasible for you? And then identify if licensing is the right thing, or maybe it's a more medium to long-term goal for them. And really what you can do is get them into employment in their field sooner than that and have licensing be a longer-term goal. And then the licensing process in Michigan, I think it's really important to explain to folks that, are you going to stay in Michigan? Because licensing is state to state in the US, and most people are from countries where that doesn't exist. So if they are going to be in Michigan for a couple of years and then they think they might move to another state, they would have to go through this process all over again. So I like to explain to people that that's the case. And if they're not going to be in Michigan long-term, then maybe licensing isn't for them right now. They wouldn't want to make the investment in time or money if it's something that's only going to support them for a couple of years. So I shared here, this is a website that our office populates. It's actually hosted on Laura's website because they do the licensing. And the state is terrible at URLs, but if you want to search Laura skilled immigrants, it'll get you to this page, and then you can bookmark it. And there are currently, there were 42, but we have just recently whittled them down a little bit to about 35 licensing guides for internationally trained people. So you can scroll through those and identify if that's somebody that's working with you. This is a really good place to start with them, to have a conversation about what would be required for licensing in terms of, what's the cost, how long might it take, what exams do you have to take, and that also covers who they should get their degree evaluated through. So that can answer that question for them. There's also, you can see kind of at the bottom of this graphic, there's 3 thumbnails on that page that I created a couple of years ago for healthcare guides. And so if an individual was a registered nurse or a doctor or a dentist from another country and they want to get licensed here in Michigan, it shows them in a much clearer way, what that pathway looks like. And if at any point they can't, proceed beyond the next step, then it also gives them alternative career options as well. So how could they use their skills and experience in other positions that maybe they could do without being licensed? Maybe there's just an industry certification, or going back to school for a slightly different program that uses similar skill set or was patient facing and those kind of things. So those are great tools for you to connect people with. And again, I want to offer our services. If there's somebody that's coming to you with some of these specific questions, you can always reach out to me. I'll schedule a quick 30-minute consultation with them and you, and just get them on the right path. Okay, next slide. Oh, this one. I think I might have covered that anyways, but yeah, essentially this is it. It might not always work for them for lots of reasons, right? We talked about today, but there's almost always a way that they can use their skills in a similar type of job. And so we want to just be very clear with them that not all hope is not lost if they can't do exactly the same thing that they did before in exactly the same job title. There are other ways to use their skills and to work in their profession and to kind of meet the things that, sustain them and want to do, because folks, those are passion professions. And so a lot of times if they feel like they can't get back into that, a big piece of their identity is missing. And so we want to work with them to figure out how we can get them as close as possible to what they want to do and feel fulfilled by it. Okay, Jackie, next one. Okay, just to round us out and end us off, I wanted to put a couple of these messages as takeaways. Yeah, so essentially, I want folks to know that internationally trained professionals, they're already there. They have their skills, they have their qualifications, they need some support. They need usually a few small interventions in terms of understanding the system, understanding the professional job search process, using things like credential evaluation and career pathways to get them where they want to be. But they are themselves, and their experience is unique. And I think the way that we can support them best is by understanding that and giving them individualized career support. ESL, we didn't get a whole lot of time to talk about this piece, but a lot of times people say, you know, they're gonna test out, but they still want to be enrolled in English services. I don't know what to do. You know, I thought about enrolling them in a GED. I would encourage everyone not to do that, because again, that goes back to that conversation before about demoting their existing experience. So it's a good way to keep them enrolled and getting some access to ESL, but it also then puts them on a program where they can't acknowledge their time and energy on their resume without demoting their existing skills. So it's a tricky situation, I know, and I'm trying to figure out some additional supports. Our office is going to be launching a program. We did a pilot before COVID, and now we are going to try to expand it a little bit through Voxy Engine. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Voxy, but we're going to be purchasing a couple hundred licenses for them over the course of a year for the refugees in the refugee resettlement programs, as well as folks who would have been the traditional MITS clients, which are these highly skilled immigrants. So that's something we could offer these folks if they kind of age out or test out of your programs without having to connect them to GED programs that they might not need. And then the other piece too, I would just want to say is again about the upskilling piece and how much benefit people can get from these short-term credentials of value, as long as they meet those criteria, that it's really what they do need that fits their gaps, and will get them to the positions that they want. It's really the most important thing in this process, is to get people these short-term credentials of value that are going to get them more competitive in the job search process. That's probably the best thing we can do for them after their English proficiency. So I want to stop there. Yeah, go ahead, Tammy.
Sorry. So when our ESL students test out of ESL, we have a class we added called English Plus, so that they're not in GED, but they're in ABE, right? They're still below a 12th grade level, so they can continue. The only dilemma we have, which maybe you can help with, is they no longer qualify for us to be able to pay for their training under IELCE. And as of right now, the WIOA General Education Grant does not allow to pay for any training, like not even 20%. And in some states, they do allow for a percentage of WIOA, General WIOA Title II, to pay for training. And then those English Plus students, we could support all the way through the system instead of having to count on Michigan Works having enough funding so they can pay for the training for those students. Because sometimes we have a waiting list because Michigan Works only has so much funding, and we can't pay for the English Plus people's training. We can pay for the ESL students training, but not English Plus. But that way they're still getting their English advancement without being in like a GED or high school completion, because we have the adult secondary education qualification that we can service anybody under a 12th grade reading and math level.
Would you mind, like, whenever you recover from the conference, just to write that in a blurb for me and send it to me by email, and I'm going to add it to my list of things that I want to
email me a reminder
advocate.
To email you when I'm out of this conference Zoom.
Okay, I just want to add that to the things that I can advocate for, because I think that's a really important point, and it shows one of those gaps that we could probably address with some braided funding opportunities, or just generally being more strategic at the state level. So that's a really good point. I see that Stephanie has a comment here about a kindergarten teacher from Morocco. I think that Michigan Works probably doesn't know what has happened over the last few years with supports for alternative pathways for internationally trained teachers. So I can talk to you offline because it's kind of a long explanation, but the general, like the Cliff's Notes, is she potentially could qualify for the traditional licensing route through MDE, or she could qualify for the alternative route through Teachers Tomorrow, both of which might be possible for her depending on her level of English. And so there is a pathway for her to teach again. The most important thing, obviously, is that she gets her English proficiency to that level, because that's going to identify how successful she can be in either one of those pathways. So I can connect with you offline, Stephanie, about that and have a conversation with her too. And then, yeah, I love this idea of English Plus too. I had no idea. That's really awesome news. I love that. And I apologize for throwing so much information at you all at the end of the day on a Friday, right before Halloween, but I'm always really thankful for the opportunity to connect with the adult ed and ESL community. And you guys are amazing partners in this work. And I just want to thank you all for going to bat for your students all the time. It's really appreciated.
And I'm just going to add really quickly, because there's interest about the English Plus. The problem with English Plus is that you will find once they get to that level, they need to test like 3 grade levels to get a gain. So they don't always get you an EFL performance gain like you're used to seeing those good performances through ESL. So you might get dinged a little on the performance area, but if you have them in IET or some other program, you're going to get the post-secondary credit or the employment or some other gain for them. Mm-hmm. We learned that the hard way the very first year. We were like,
Metrics always get you. Always.
Oh yeah. There's always got to be a downside when you think you found a plus. All right. Well, it's 4:03. Any other questions before I stop recording? Actually, I can stop recording. And then if anyone has any side conversations with Annie they'd like to have, that's totally fine. I'll stop sharing so everybody can see. And then
thanks, Carrie.
stop recording.